Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we re-journeying back in time to one of the most consequential conflicts in ancient history, the Punic Wars between Rome and Carthage. More than just a series of battles, this was a century-long struggle that defined the future of an entire sea, and, by extension, the Western world. The final, chilling declaration. Carthago, delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed, was just a political statement. It was the proclamation of a new world order. How did the fall of this mighty Phoenician city-state pave the way for Rome's unprecedented rise? Let's find out. Our story begins with two titans staring each other down across the sparkling waters of the Mediterranean. On the Italian peninsula, the Roman Republic, a land-based power with a disciplined citizen army, was consolidating its control. Across the sea, on the coast of modern-day Tunisia, stood Carthage, the master of the waves, a formidable maritime empire built on trade. Its influence stretched from North Africa to Spain, and its navy was the undisputed king of the sea. For a long time, these two powers coexisted, their spheres of influence largely separate. But as Rome's ambitions grew, a collision became inevitable. The flashpoint. The island of Sicily, a strategic and agricultural jewel coveted by both. The First Punic War, which erupted in 264 BC, was a brutal 23-year slog. It forced Rome, a nation of farmers and foot soldiers, to do the unthinkable: build a navy from scratch. Imagine the sheer audacity. They literally reverse-engineered a shipwrecked Carthaginian vessel. But Rome's true genius wasn't just copying, it was innovating. They invented the corvus, a boarding bridge that turned a sea battle into a land battle on water, playing directly to their strengths. After immense losses on both sides, Rome emerged victorious, claiming Sicily as its first overseas province, along with Sardinia and Corsica. Carthage was humbled, but not broken. The stage was set for round two, and a name that would echo through history: Hannibal Barca. Hannibal was more than just a general. He was the living embodiment of Carthaginian vengeance. Swearing an oath as a child to forever be an enemy of Rome, he devised one of the most daring military plans in history. Instead of a direct naval assault, he would take the fight to Rome's doorstep. In 218 BC, he marched his army, complete with war elephants, out of Spain, across the Pyrenees, and over the treacherous Alps in the dead of winter. It was an impossible feat, a logistical nightmare that cost him nearly half his men. But the men who survived were hardened, loyal, and ready to shatter the Roman Republic. For the next 15 years, Hannibal rampaged through Italy. He inflicted a series of crushing defeats on the Romans, with the Battle of Cannae being his masterpiece. There, he used a brilliant double envelopment tactic to encircle and annihilate a much larger Roman army. It was a tactical masterclass that is still studied in military academies today. Rome was on its knees, its allies wavering. The city itself was in a state of sheer panic. It seemed as though Hannibal was unstoppable. But Rome had a secret weapon, its unbreakable spirit and a new general, Scipio. While Hannibal was wreaking havoc in Italy, a young Roman general named Publius Cornelius Scipio was learning from Hannibal's own tactics. Instead of confronting Hannibal directly, Scipio took the war back to Carthage's home turf. He invaded North Africa, forcing the Carthaginian government to recall Hannibal to defend the homeland. The final showdown came in 202 BC at the Battle of Zama. Here, Scipio, having studied Hannibal's methods, turned the tables. He neutralized Hannibal's elephants and used his superior cavalry to outflank and crush the Carthaginian army. Hannibal had finally been defeated. The Second Punic War was over. Rome was now the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. The peace terms were harsh. Carthage was stripped of its overseas territories. Its navy was dismantled, and it was forbidden from waging war without Rome's permission. For half a century, a fragile peace held. Carthage, focusing on trade, actually began to recover economically. But in Rome, the old fears and hatreds lingered. One senator, Cato the Elder, became obsessed. He ended every speech, no matter the topic, with that famous, ominous phrase, "Carthago delenda est." He argued that as long as Carthage existed, it would remain a threat. This constant drumbeat of fear and ambition eventually led to the Third Punic War. This final conflict, beginning in 149 BC, was less of a war and more of an execution. The Romans laid siege to the city of Carthage, and for 3 long years the Carthaginians mounted a heroic but hopeless defense. They fought street by street, house by house. When the city finally fell in 146 BC, the aftermath was horrific. Roman soldiers were unleashed, and what followed was a week of relentless slaughter and destruction. The city was systematically plundered, its buildings torn down, and its very foundations razed. Ancient sources claim the Romans even sowed the fields with salt to ensure nothing would ever grow there again. While modern historians debate the literal truth of the salting, the symbolic message was clear. Carthage was to be erased from history. The fall of Carthage was a seismic event that reshaped the ancient world. First and foremost, Rome's victory eliminated its only real rival for Mediterranean dominance. With Carthage gone, there was no one left to challenge Roman authority. The sea truly became Mare Nostrum, our sea. This new, uncontested control allowed Roman trade, culture, and legions to spread unimpeded, laying the groundwork for the vast empire to come. The territorial gains from the wars, Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, parts of Spain, and North Africa, provided Rome with immense resources, grain to feed its growing population, and minerals to fuel its economy. The Punic Wars also fundamentally transformed the Roman military. The constant existential threat forced them to adapt and evolve, creating the most professional and effective fighting force the world had ever seen. The influx of wealth from conquered lands, however, had a double-edged effect. It fueled a massive economic boom, but also exacerbated social inequalities. Vast slave-run estates, or latifundia, owned by the wealthy elite, pushed small farmers off their land and into the cities, creating a volatile urban population. This social tension would eventually contribute to the downfall of the Republic and the rise of the empire. In a way, the destruction of Carthage planted the seeds for Rome's own future transformation and eventual decline. So, when we look back at the rubble of ancient Carthage, we see more than just the ghost of a fallen city. We see the birth certificate of the Roman Empire. The victory over its greatest rival was the pivotal moment that set Rome on a trajectory to conquer the known world, shaping the laws, languages, and cultures of Europe for the next 2 millennia. The echo of Carthage must be destroyed is a chilling reminder of how the fall of one power is often the foundation upon which another is built. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey's greatest conflict. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more deep dives into the past. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Let us know in the comments what historical event you'd like us to explore next. Until then, stay curious. Have you ever wondered what happens after a great empire falls? What rises from the ashes? In 146 BC, after a century of conflict, the mighty city of Carthage, the jewel of the Mediterranean, was utterly destroyed by Rome. The fields were sown with salt, a symbolic act to ensure nothing would ever grow there again. But history has a funny way of surprising us. The story of North Africa didn't end with Carthage's fall. In many ways, it was just beginning. This is the story of a land reborn, a tale of transformation, resilience, and the birth of a new world from the embers of the old. With Carthage gone, Rome had a new, vast territory on its hands. What was once its greatest rival was now the province of Africa. Initially, Roman control was harsh, focused on extracting resources and preventing any future threat. But simply ruling by the sword isn't sustainable. Rome, ever the pragmatist, knew it needed to build, not just conquer. They established a new administrative capital, not on the ruins of Carthage, but nearby. This new city, and the governance it represented, was the first step in a profound transformation. The Romans laid down their grid-like streets, built forums, temples, and aqueducts, stamping their authority not just with legions, but with engineering and law. But how do you govern a people you've just conquered? You can't replace everyone. The Romans were masters of incorporation. Instead of trying to impose a completely alien system, they cleverly integrated the existing local structures. Punic and Berber elites, the local aristocrats and leaders, were offered a deal. They could keep their land, their local influence, and even gain Roman citizenship as long as they played by Rome's rules. They became the crucial intermediaries, collecting taxes, administering local justice, and keeping the peace. It was a brilliant strategy. It gave the local populations a stake in the success of the Roman project, turning potential rebels into partners. This fusion of local knowledge and Roman administrative power created a stable and efficient bureaucracy that would last for centuries. Walking through the ruins of cities like Leptis, Magna, or Thuga, today, you can literally see this cultural fusion set in stone, side by side with temples to Jupiter and Minerva. You find inscriptions dedicated to the old Punic gods, Baal-Hammon and Tanit, who were often syncretized with their Roman counterparts, Saturn and Calestis. Latin became the language of government and high culture, but in the streets and homes, people continued to speak Punic and various Berber languages. The toga might have been the fashion in the forum, but local traditions, foods, and family structures persisted. This wasn't a simple replacement of one culture with another. It was a dynamic blend, a new Romano-African identity that was unique in the Roman Empire. This cultural hybridity was a source of immense strength and creativity, producing famous figures like the writer Apulus, author of The Golden Ass, who proudly celebrated his mixed heritage. This stable political and cultural environment set the stage for an unprecedented economic boom. North Africa became the breadbasket of Rome. Vast quantities of grain, olive oil, and wine flowed from its fertile fields to feed the sprawling metropolis. The region wasn't just an agricultural powerhouse. It was also famous for its wild animal trade, for the gladiatorial games, and its production of a luxurious red slip pottery that was exported across the empire. The pinnacle of this prosperity came under the Severan dynasty in the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries A.D. The emperor, Septimius Severus, was himself a native of Leptis Magna in modern-day Libya. He poured immense wealth into his homeland, embellishing its cities with magnificent arches, forums, and basilicas. During this golden age, North Africa was one of the wealthiest and most urbanized regions in the entire Roman world, a testament to the success of its integration. But as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. By the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire entered a period of crisis. Civil wars, economic instability, and external threats weakened the central authority. In North Africa, this decline manifested in different ways. Roman control became less secure, and local power dynamics began to shift once more. Amidst this turmoil, a new force emerged that would fundamentally reshape the region: Christianity. North Africa became a vibrant and influential center of early Christian thought. It produced some of the most important figures in the history of the Church, like Tertullian, Cyprian, and, most famously, Augustine of Hippo. Their writings and theological debates defined much of Christian doctrine. The Church created a new social structure, a new source of authority that often rivaled and eventually surpassed that of the weakening Roman state. The transition from a pagan Roman North Africa to a Christian one was a monumental shift that would define its identity for centuries to come. While the story of Roman Africa often focuses on the coastal cities, there's another crucial part of the puzzle. Away from the direct control of the legions in the mountains and pre-desert regions, the indigenous Berber populations, also known as the Amazigh, were never fully subdued. They maintained their own languages, social structures, and traditions. As Roman power waned, these groups began to assert their independence more forcefully. Warlords and tribal confederations carved out their own kingdoms and principalities on the fringes of Roman territory. These Berber kingdoms, like the one led by the famous queen, Kahina, centuries later, represented a persistent alternative source of power. They were not just barbarians at the gates. They were an integral part of the North African landscape, interacting with the Roman world through trade, raiding, and as auxiliary soldiers in the Roman army. Their growing strength was a clear sign that the era of unified Roman control was over, paving the way for the next chapter in North Africa's long and complex history. From the ashes of Carthage, a new civilization was born, one that was Roman, Punic, and Berber all at once. It was a land of incredible wealth, vibrant culture, and profound intellectual change. The transformation of North Africa after the Punic Wars shows us that history is not just about destruction, but also about creation and adaptation. It's a powerful reminder that even after the most devastating fire, new life can and will emerge, often in ways no one could have predicted. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through time. If you enjoyed this exploration of North Africa's incredible history, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more stories from our shared past. Let me know in the comments which part of this story you found most fascinating. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever heard the phrase, Carthago delenda est? Carthage must be destroyed for years. This was the relentless refrain of the Roman senator Cato the Elder. In 146 BC, his wish became a terrifying reality. But the fall of Carthage was more than just the end of a rival city. It was a pivotal moment that reshaped the ancient world and set Rome on its path to empire. Today, we're diving into how the total destruction of Carthage was a definitive turning point in Roman history. For over a century, Rome and Carthage, two titans of the Mediterranean, were locked in a series of epic conflicts known as the Punic Wars. From Hannibal crossing the Alps with his war elephants to dramatic naval battles, this rivalry was legendary. But after the Third Punic War, Rome didn't just want victory. They wanted annihilation. The city of Carthage was razed to the ground. Its fields were supposedly sown with salt to ensure nothing would ever grow again, and its people were sold into slavery. Why such brutality? Because, for Rome, this wasn't just about winning a war. It was about sending a message to the entire world. With Carthage gone, Rome's dominance over the Mediterranean was absolute. There were no more challengers, no other naval powers that could even dream of contesting Roman control. The sea, once a battleground, became a Roman lake. Mare Nostrum, our sea. This uncontested control allowed Roman trade to flourish and its legions to be deployed anywhere with unprecedented speed. The destruction of Carthage wasn't just the end of an enemy. It was the dawn of Rome's maritime empire. It secured the shipping lanes and trade routes that would fuel the Republic, and later the Empire, for centuries to come. The Punic Wars themselves were a crucible that forged the Roman military into the most formidable fighting force of its time. Before fighting Carthage, Rome's experience was primarily in land battles on the Italian peninsula. The wars forced them to innovate. They had to build a massive navy from scratch, learning to fight at sea by copying and improving upon Carthaginian ship designs. They developed new tactics, like the corvus, a boarding bridge that allowed their superior soldiers to fight on enemy ships as if on land. These long, brutal wars also professionalized the army. Soldiers served longer campaigns far from home, creating a more disciplined and experienced fighting force. The Roman legion that conquered Gaul under Caesar was a direct descendant of the army hardened by the struggle against Hannibal. Economically, the fall of Carthage was a massive windfall for Rome. The fertile lands of North Africa, once Carthage's breadbasket, now belonged to the Republic. This new province, called Africa, became a vital source of grain, feeding Rome's growing population and preventing food shortages. The vast wealth plundered from the city itself, along with the acquisition of its extensive trade networks, poured into Rome's treasury. This influx of capital funded massive public works projects, from aqueducts to roads, and enriched a new class of Roman elites. However, this new wealth also had a dark side. It widened the gap between the rich and the poor as large. Slave-run estates, called latifundia, displaced small farmers, contributing to social tensions that would later boil over into civil war. The cultural impact was just as profound. Rome had always been a culture that absorbed and adapted practices from the peoples it conquered, and Carthage was no exception. Despite the utter destruction, Carthaginian influence seeped into Roman life. Some Punic gods found their way into the Roman pantheon, syncretized with Roman deities. Agricultural techniques from the famously productive Carthaginian estates were studied and adopted by Roman landowners. Even the story of Carthage's fall became a cornerstone of Roman identity. It was a cautionary tale, a myth of a worthy but ultimately defeated foe that reinforced Roman virtues of perseverance, duty, and martial prowess. The ghost of Carthage haunted the Roman imagination for generations. Finally, the sheer, unmitigated brutality of Carthage's end was a deliberate act of political terror. The message was clear. This is what happens when you defy Rome. The story of a great city utterly wiped from the face of the earth instilled a deep and abiding fear in Rome as other rivals and allies, kings and city-states across the Mediterranean, took note. It was a demonstration of what the Romans called imperium, the absolute power to command and to destroy. This act of total war set a terrifying precedent and became a powerful tool of Roman foreign policy. It was cheaper to rule through fear than through constant occupation, and the memory of Carthage ensured compliance for centuries. So, the fall of Carthage was far more than a simple military victory. It was the moment Rome transitioned from a regional Italian power to an undisputed Mediterranean superpower. It transformed its military, reshaped its economy, influenced its culture, and defined its imperial strategy. The smoking ruins of that once great city laid the foundation for the Roman Empire. An empire whose legacy continues to shape our world today. The destruction was total, but in its ashes, a new world order was born. What do you think? Was Rome justified, or was this one of the greatest atrocities of the ancient world? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into Roman history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. See you next time. Have you ever wondered what happens when an entire civilization is wiped off the map? Not just defeated, but utterly annihilated. That's the story of Carthage, a vibrant maritime empire, and its rival, Rome. The final words of the Roman senator Cato the Elder, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed, were not just a political slogan. They were a death sentence. In 146 BC, after 3 brutal Punic wars, Rome didn't just conquer Carthage, it razed the city to the ground, sold its people into slavery, and legend says even sowed its fields with salt to ensure nothing would ever grow again. But what were the real consequences of this cataclysmic event? The fall of Carthage wasn't just the end of one story. It was the explosive beginning of another, the story of the Roman Empire. The destruction of its greatest rival marked a point of no return that would reshape the Mediterranean and, ultimately, the entire Western world. Join me as we explore how from the ashes of Carthage, the Roman Empire rose to unprecedented power, and how the echoes of that ancient conflict still resonate today. Let's rewind. Before its fall, Carthage was a powerhouse. Located in modern-day Tunisia, it controlled a vast trading network across the Mediterranean. Its navy was legendary, its wealth immense, and its influence stretched from North Africa to Spain. Rome, at the time, was a rising republic on the Italian peninsula, ambitious and militaristic, but still just one of several major players. The Punic Wars were a clash of titans, a struggle for dominance that lasted over a century. The Second Punic War, with Hannibal's audacious crossing of the Alps with elephants, is one of history's most famous military campaigns. Hannibal brought Rome to its knees, but he couldn't deliver the final blow. This near-death experience hardened Rome, fueling a desire not just for victory, but for total security. And total security meant the complete elimination of Carthage as a threat. The Third Punic War was less a war and more an execution. Rome, now overwhelmingly powerful, laid siege to a much weakened Carthage, and the result was inevitable. The city's destruction was a brutal and terrifying message to the world. Defy Rome, and this is your fate. This act of strategic annihilation cleared the board. With no major rival left in the Western Mediterranean, a massive power vacuum was created, and Rome was more than ready to fill it. The fall of Carthage wasn't just a military victory. It was the moment Rome's mindset shifted from republic to empire, from defense to dominance. With Carthage gone, Rome's expansion went into overdrive. The former Carthaginian territories were like ripe fruit, ready for the picking. Sicily, Corsica, and Sardinia, which had been contested for decades, were now firmly under Roman control. These islands weren't just dots on a map. They were strategic naval bases and, more importantly, a vital source of grain. Control of the granaries of the Mediterranean meant Rome could feed its growing population and its massive armies, securing its internal stability. The conquest didn't stop there. Roman legions pushed into Spain, absorbing the rich silver mines that had once funded Hannibal's campaigns. They consolidated control over North Africa, turning vast swaths of fertile land into Roman provinces. In a matter of decades, the Mediterranean Sea, once a shared space of commerce and conflict, began to be known by a new name, Mare Nostrum, or our sea. This territorial expansion was unprecedented. For the first time, a single power controlled the coastlines from the Strait of Gibraltar to the shores of Greece. This unification of the Mediterranean basin under Roman rule facilitated trade, communication, and the movement of troops on a scale never seen before. The infrastructure of empire roads, aqueducts, and ports began to snake across this new, vast territory, knitting it together under a single administration. The destruction of Carthage had directly paved the way for Rome to become the undisputed master of the Mediterranean world. The influx of wealth from these new territories was staggering. Imagine caravans of gold and silver from Spanish mines, ships laden with grain from Africa and Sicily, and a flood of enslaved people from conquered lands, all pouring into Rome. This new wealth transformed the Roman economy, but not everyone benefited equally. A new class of superrich emerged, the equestrians, or business class, who profited immensely from war contracts, tax farming, and land speculation. They built lavish villas through extravagant parties and lived lives of unimaginable luxury. At the same time, this new wealth destroyed the backbone of the old Roman Republic, the small-scale citizen farmer. While these farmers were away, fighting in Rome's endless wars, their lands were often neglected. Unable to compete with the cheap grain flooding in from the provinces, produced on massive estates called latifundia, worked by slave labor, many small farmers went bankrupt. They were forced to sell their ancestral lands to the wealthy elite and flocked to the city of Rome, seeking work. This created a huge, impoverished urban population known as the proletariat. This growing gap between the ultra-rich and the desperately poor created immense social and political tension. The old Republican values of duty, austerity, and civic virtue began to erode, replaced by greed and political corruption. This economic disparity would fuel a century of civil strife, from the populist reforms of the Gracchi brothers to the rise of powerful generals like Marius and Sulla, who recruited soldiers from the landless poor, promising them land and booty in exchange for loyalty not to the state, but to them personally. The wealth that came from destroying Carthage, ironically, sowed the seeds of the Republic's own destruction. This social and economic turmoil forced a radical transformation in Roman governance. The old Republican system, designed for a small city-state, was simply not equipped to manage a sprawling, multicultural empire. The Senate, once the venerable heart of Roman politics, became an arena for factional infighting among powerful families. The institutions of the Republic began to crack under the strain. The rise of powerful generals who commanded the personal loyalty of their armies was a direct threat to the Senate's authority. Figures like Julius Caesar, who conquered Gaul and amassed incredible wealth, and a veteran army, could challenge the state itself. The civil wars that racked the late Republic were essentially a struggle to answer one question: who should rule Rome? The traditional collective leadership of the Senate, or a single, powerful autocrat? In the end, after decades of bloodshed, Caesar's heir, Octavian, emerged victorious. He cleverly maintained the facade of the Republic, with its Senate and assemblies, but concentrated all real power in his own hands. He took the title Augustus, the first Roman emperor. This new system, the Principate, provided the stability the empire desperately needed. This transition from republic to empire, born from the consequences of Rome's aggressive expansion, created a model of governance that would influence Western civilization for millennia. Concepts like a professional civil service, a unified legal code that applied to all citizens, and the very idea of a centralized state ruling over diverse peoples were honed and perfected by the Roman Empire. Many of our modern political structures, from legal principles to administrative systems, have their distant roots in the solutions Rome devised to manage the empire it won after Carthage fell. The fall of Carthage also represented a major cultural shift. For centuries, the center of gravity in the Mediterranean had been contested. Carthage was a Phoenician colony, representing a Semitic North African culture with deep roots in the ancient Near East. Its religion, its language, and its traditions were distinct from the Greco-Roman world. Its destruction was not just the removal of a political rival, but the symbolic victory of one cultural sphere over another. With Carthage gone, the cultural and intellectual heart of the Mediterranean shifted decisively to Europe first, to Rome, and by extension to Greece, whose culture Rome so admired and absorbed. Roman Latin became the language of power, administration, and literature across the entire Western Mediterranean, supplanting Punic and other local languages. The Roman pantheon of gods, heavily influenced by the Greek Olympians, spread throughout the provinces, while Rome was often pragmatic, allowing local customs and religions to continue as long as they didn't challenge Roman authority. The overarching cultural framework became undeniably Roman. The African-centric world of Carthage gave way to a Eurocentric one. This had profound long-term consequences. It set the stage for the development of what we now call Western civilization, a cultural lineage that traces itself back through Rome to Greece. Imagine an alternate history where Carthage had won the Punic Wars. The dominant language in Europe might have been a derivative of Punic. The major religious and philosophical ideas might have flowed from North Africa and the Levant, rather than from Athens and Rome. The fall of Carthage didn't just ensure Rome's political dominance. It ensured the dominance of a Greco-Roman cultural template that would define Europe for the next 2,000 years. So, the destruction of Carthage was far more than just one city's tragic end. It was the catalyst that transformed a regional republic into a world empire. It unleashed a torrent of wealth that reshaped Roman society, creating deep divisions that ultimately led to the downfall of the Republic itself. From the chaos of civil war, a new political order emerged: the Roman Empire, a system of governance whose legacy is still embedded in our world today. And finally, it cemented the cultural dominance of Europe in the Mediterranean, setting a course for history that we are still on. The story of Rome and Carthage is a powerful reminder of how a single event, a single act of utter destruction, can have consequences that ripple through centuries, shaping economies, political systems, and the very cultural identity of future civilizations. The ruins of Carthage became the foundations of the Roman Empire, a legacy written in stone, law, and language, reminding us that empires are often built on the ashes of their rivals. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient history, please hit that like button and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you do unmiss our next exploration of the past. Let me know in the comments what historical event you'd like to see covered next. Until then, stay curious. Have you ever wondered what would happen if the world's two biggest superpowers went head-to-head in a winner-takes-all showdown? That's exactly what happened in the ancient world, a titanic struggle that decided the fate of Western civilization. Today, we read diving deep into one of history's most pivotal moments, the fall of Carthage and what it truly meant for the rise of Rome. This wasn't just a battle. It was the end of an era and the dawn of a new one. Before Rome was an empire, it had a rival and equal, and in many ways, a superior. That rival was Carthage, a mighty maritime power based in modern-day Tunisia. For over a century, these two titans clashed in a series of conflicts known as the Punic Wars. This was a rivalry born of ambition, a fight for control over the sparkling, resource Mediterranean Sea. Carthage, with its vast trade network, powerful navy, and legendary generals like Hannibal, posed the single greatest threat Rome would ever face. The First Punic War was a grueling, 23-year naval struggle over Sicily. Rome, a land-based power, had to build a navy from scratch to even compete. They reverse-engineered a captured Carthaginian ship and, through sheer grit and innovation, eventually won. But the peace was fragile. The Second Punic War is the stuff of legend. This is where Hannibal Barca enters the scene, a military genius who swore an oath as a child to be an enemy of Rome for life. His audacious plan to march war elephants over the Alps into Italy is one of the most famous military feats in history. For 15 years, Hannibal terrorized the Italian peninsula, handing Rome one devastating defeat after another. Most famously, at the Battle of Cannae, where he annihilated a massive Roman army. Rome was on its knees, its very survival hanging by a thread. But Rome didn't break. It adapted. This is where the genius of Rome truly shines. Instead of surrendering, they learned from their enemy. Led by Scipio Africanus, they took the fight to Carthage's home turf in North Africa, forcing Hannibal to return to defend his city. At the Battle of Zama, Scipio used Hannibal's own tactics against him, securing a decisive victory for Rome. Carthage was defeated, stripped of its territories, its navy, and forced to pay a crippling indemnity. It was humbled, but it was still there. For 50 years, a tense peace held. Carthage, ever the resilient merchant city, began to recover economically. But in Rome, the fear of a resurgent Carthage festered. One senator, Cato the Elder, became obsessed. He ended every speech, no matter the topic, with the same chilling phrase: Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. This constant drumbeat of fear and vengeance eventually pushed Rome to act. The Third Punic War wasn't really a war. It was an extermination. Rome laid siege to the great city of Carthage. For 3 long years, the Carthaginians held out with desperate courage, but the outcome was never in doubt. In 146 BC, Roman soldiers breached the walls. What followed was a week of brutal street-by-street fighting and systematic destruction. The city was burned to the ground, its buildings torn down, and legend says the Romans even sowed the fields with salt to ensure nothing would ever grow there again. Carthage, the vibrant heart of a powerful civilization, was wiped from the face of the earth. So, what did this cataclysmic event really mean? First and foremost, the destruction of Carthage eliminated Rome's only significant rival in the Mediterranean. With Carthage gone, the sea truly became mare nostrum, our sea. Rome was now the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean, a hyperpower with no peer. This set the stage for its expansion eastward, eventually conquering Greece, Egypt, and the entire Hellenistic world. The Roman Republic was on its way to becoming the Roman Empire. The fall of Carthage also had a profound economic impact. Rome seized control of North Africa's fertile lands, which became the breadbasket of the Republic, supplying vast quantities of grain to feed its growing population and armies. This influx of wealth and resources fueled Rome's economic engine, funding further conquests and massive public works projects. The spoils of war enriched the Roman elite, but also widened the gap between the rich and poor, sowing the seeds of social conflict that would later plague the Republic. Militarily, the Punic Wars were a crucible that forged the Roman army into the most effective fighting force in the ancient world. They learned invaluable lessons in strategy, logistics, and naval warfare from their Carthaginian adversaries. The need to defeat Hannibal forced them to innovate, creating a more flexible and adaptable military command structure. This battle-hardened legionary system would be the tool Rome used to build its empire. Interestingly, even in destruction, Carthage influenced Rome. The Romans, despite their hatred, respected Carthaginian expertise. They studied Carthaginian agricultural techniques and, as mentioned, their naval designs and military tactics. It's a classic case of learning from your vanquished foe. The ghost of Carthage helped shape the empire that replaced it. Perhaps the most profound consequence was the civilizational shift. Before the Punic Wars, the centers of power and culture were spread across the Mediterranean, with significant hubs in North Africa and the Near East. Carthage was the torchbearer of an ancient Phoenician legacy. Its destruction marked a decisive shift in the center of gravity of civilization from the southern and eastern Mediterranean to Europe. The future would be written in Latin, not Punic. The Roman European model of law, governance, and culture would become the foundation for Western civilization, a direct result of this victory. The legacy of Carthage's fall echoes through history, offering a timeless lesson in power dynamics. It shows how fear can drive a superpower to utterly annihilate a rival, how victory can transform a nation, and how the fall of one power directly leads to the rise of another. The story of Rome and Carthage is more than just ancient history. It's a stark reminder of the brutal calculus of power and the thin line between greatness and oblivion. The world we live in today was fundamentally shaped in the fires that consumed Carthage. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into history. And let me know in the comments what historical event you'd like to explore next. Until next time, stay curious.